Go ahead. Okay, let's go ahead and start. All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for what I think will be a timely and important conversation. This conversation is actually being brought to you by the Dartmouth Free Speech Alliance, which is committed to upholding Dartmouth's historic commitment to free expression and open inquiry. Our mission is to promote a campus culture that values diverse viewpoints and encourages robust, respectful dialogue. You can learn more about our work at, I hope you write this down, www.dartmouthfreespeech.com. My name is Steve Avila, and I'm a graduate of the class of 2011. I am from and live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and have been politically active since my days at Dartmouth. We're here to talk about free expression, civic engagement, and how these ideas play out in real life, especially on college campuses and in public discourse more broadly. These are topics that spark strong opinions, thoughtful debate, and sometimes real tension, which makes open and respectful dialogue all the more important. I'm really pleased to welcome Professor Sean
West.
Westwood today. Professor Westwood brings a unique perspective to this conversation through his experience working at the intersection of institutional policy, student life, and public engagement. He's spent a lot of time thinking about how communities can uphold free expression while also fostering inclusion, safety, and trust. We'll start with a moderated conversation and at the same time accept questions from the Zoom chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to just type them in into the Zoom chat box. And I encourage everyone to listen with curiosity and engage thoughtfully. And with that, Professor, thank you for being here. We'll start by you introducing yourself and your passion.
So thank you, Steve. Thank you all for being here on this Tuesday evening, maybe Tuesday afternoon if you're on the West Coast. I'm Sean Westwood. I'm a professor in the government department. I also direct the Polarization Research Lab, and I've been working on political polarization, public opinion, and how people process disagreement for about 15 years now. Turns out it's a little relevant these days, perhaps more relevant than we might like, but I'm excited that we're having the conversations together as a country, as an institution, and just here this evening. I really got into this work because I believe that universities are supposed to be places where we model how to disagree well. Universities are not just places where we tolerate disagreement, but where it's a necessity for intellectual growth. We have to seek it out, we have to stress test our ideas, and we need disagreement in order to come out as better citizens, as people who are better prepared to be citizens. So I fundamentally view the kind of work that you all do and the discussions that we're having as a nation right now as a really important corrective, perhaps to some of the restrictions that have manifested over the last few years. I don't want to be too much of I don't know, a pessimist on what has happened in the past, but I'm really optimistic about how we can build and move forward. I guess just to kind of bookmark what I do in this space, I am actively engaged with the Free Speech Index with FIRE. That's something that's run on my lab survey. And in the next week or so, I'll actually be working with FIRE on a consensus statement on how to build viewpoint diversity on college campuses. But again, thank you for having me here tonight.
All right. Um, could you talk a little bit about your proposal that you have written? I've taken a look about it. I've taken a look at it, and you talk about a real crisis in higher education, where students and faculty are self-censoring and debate is narrowing. Lord knows when I was at Dartmouth, I self-censored myself a
Sure.
lot, and I'm sure that continues to this very day. What convinced you this is genuinely happening and not just something people feel is happening right now?
So I don't mean to discount feelings, but I'm a data person. I'm a quantitative political scientist. I work with statistics, I work with data, and I think the data tell the story. So The Knight Foundation, a nonprofit that's generally seen to be to the left, tracks student attitudes over time. In 2016, 73% of students felt that free speech was secure on their campus. By 2024, that number dropped to 43%, right? So that's a 30-point change in 8 years. That's transformative. That's unheard of in most of what we do in social science. Not only that, but another 40% say they're uncomfortable sharing opinions on controversial topics, even in classroom discussions, right? The one place on campus where that should be the whole point. I mean, I can certainly understand wanting to censor discussion in FOCA or in line while waiting to get a coffee, but classrooms are supposed to be the space where this is meant to occur. In parallel, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, they survey faculty. And they have found that 34% of professors report pressure from their colleagues to avoid controversial research. So this is not from administrators, right? This is not pressure from those who actually exercise real power in the institution. This is soft power from peers. That's a really chilling effect, especially if you're a junior faculty member or you're not a full professor or you're trying to seek resources, support, course releases, grants from your peers. It is the case that we have, I think, kind of a perfect storm. But that then also comes in parallel to the compositional problem that we have in higher education. So at schools that are doing well, Republicans make up less than 10% of the humanities faculty. It's often zero. Between 1969 and 2014, the share of conservative faculties plummeted, while liberals have increased. So I want to emphasize this isn't about partisan scorekeeping. It's about whether students are going to encounter competing intellectual frameworks on campus. And when 91% of the humanities lean in one direction, students just simply aren't being exposed to entire traditions of thought. Burke, Tocqueville, the Federalist, Cold War liberalism. That's a real curricular gap that we have to address. So I do want to be clear, though, about something, which is that this isn't just a problem for conservatives. Yes, it is the case that conservative students report feeling that they have to hide their personal perspectives, their political views, hide who they are in order to succeed. But students on the left are also self-censoring, right? The groups on campus who feel like they can't share their views, not just Republicans. Liberals are as afraid of misstepping on complex social issues as conservatives. They'll face the same peer condemnation just from their own side. It's also the case that the moderates are really left out because they don't have a tribe to belong to, right? They don't necessarily have a group where they can have ideological representation. There's really no good space for them to have conversation at all. If they can't do it in the classroom, it's not going to happen. So the chilling effects that we're observing cut across the political spectrum, this isn't about one side being silenced. It's about a culture of fear that shuts down genuine inquiry for everyone.
I mean, I completely agree. I actually chose Dartmouth because I felt there was diversity of thought. And as an ethnic minority, as a son of immigrants, as a member of the LGBT community, I never felt marginalized or discriminated against. But for someone being right of center, very much so. And in terms of faculty, I only had one faculty member my entire time who was in the humanities. Ironically, we talk about the humanities being very left wing, who was a bit more of a centrist, if not center right. And that's if it weren't for him, my time at Dartmouth would have been very different. And you
I
emphasize,
hear that from students all the time, by the way. I hear that from students all the time.
yeah, you emphasize changing campus culture by adding new voices rather than trying to reform departments. Why do you think that approach actually works better in practice?
So the two reasons. There's a practical reason and there's a philosophical reason. The practical reason is that we just have to contend with the math. If 90% of the humanities lean in one direction, we can't achieve meaningful balance without dramatically expanding the size of these departments. And the cold truth is that interest in these departments is shrinking. So it'd be incredibly irresponsible to grow departments that are unable to fill the classes they already offer. We're not going to be able to fire the current faculty either, nor should we, right? That should not be part of the discussion. So really, then the only path forward is to figure out a way to integrate new voices without putting them in a position where they're facing extreme hostility. So I think that if you are to force a new hire onto a department, it's going to be a junior person, most likely. And if they're ideologically heterodox, if they're not part of the monoculture, it's going to be a miserable experience for them. They're going to be in a place where it's really challenging to exist, to do the work that they want to do, to be part of the social fabric. So I think that beyond the math, just trying to impose viewpoint diversity from the outside or from the administration would be a profound attack on academic freedom, and it would fail. Right? It would invite backlash, it would entrench resistance, and it would probably alienate allies. The model that I think that we should look to is the Hoover Institution at Stanford, which is a place that I'm very lucky to be affiliated with. I'm a visiting fellow there. I was there several years ago on my sabbatical. But the really important thing is that Hoover doesn't have anything to do with Stanford's departments. They don't control hiring, they don't control anything outside of their institution. But what they are able to do is build alternatives. So they bring in distinctive perspectives on campus through fellows, through research, through programming. And that creates a gravitational pull. It attracts scholars who are going to enrich the broader university. And it's going to give students an access to ideas and frameworks and thought that they potentially might otherwise not encounter. So I think that's what we should do at Dartmouth. I think that we should create a version of the Hoover Institution that is optimized for our undergraduate focused mission, because it would allow us to create an alternative space that would help students encounter genuine disagreement. It would model norms of intellectual openness. It would create an intellectual community that demonstrates the vitality of viewpoint diversity. And it would be able to do that without destroying or alienating what already exists here on campus. So the function of this would be to, over time, make Dartmouth more attractive to scholars and students who value intellectual pluralism. So that would just shift the equilibrium slowly, but organically over time. It would build an intellectual home that attracts, pulls in diverse voices rather than attacks those voices that are already on campus.
Intellectual pluralism. That's the first time I hear that term. Because usually at Dartmouth, when we talk about pluralism, it's usually in the terms of OPAL, the Office of
Sure.
Pluralism and Leadership, which has different goals.
Sure.
But on the topic of viewpoint diversity, some
Mhm.
people hear this term and they worry that it just means importing politics onto campus. How do you explain what this institute is and isn't to any skeptics?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So just let me be clear. This is not about injecting politics into chemistry or physics, right? The number of protons in a carbon atom is not political, and it should not be political. There are fields where there is objective truth and where viewpoint diversity has nothing to say, nothing to contribute. But what about the role that society has in caring for the sick? That's political. The right balance between economic growth and environmental regulation, political. Whether federalism or centralized government better protects liberty. These are questions where serious, well credentialed, well educated people will disagree based upon different values, different readings of the evidence, and different visions of what it means to have human flourishing. Right now, in many departments, students are only hearing one side of those debates,
Mhm.
presented as though it were settled science, and it's not. So we should try to recognize the fact that these are live, contested political questions, and that we're doing students a disservice by pretending otherwise. So this isn't about making sure that policy debates uh, are aligned with one viewpoint. It's making sure that they're not lopsided. It's about reflecting the real world. Roughly half this country is conservative, right? That is important to represent on our campus. They deserve to have their intellectual traditions taken seriously in departments, and our students need to understand what those perspectives actually are, right? So I would contend that our liberal students are actually being failed by many of these departments, because if you're not challenged, if you're not exposed to arguments that perhaps push back against your worldview, you're not learning. You're basically just being reinforced and coddled. And that's not the goal of an institution. But I think it's perhaps even worse than that. If we look at the ideological range in some of our fields and some of our departments, if AOC or Ilhan Omar were professors, they'd be centrists. So this isn't just about representing views on both sides of the aisle, but ensuring that we're not focused on extreme views on one side of the aisle. And we're focused on the questions that matter most and the honest fact that there's disagreement on almost every social policy debate in this country.
I mean, this just reminds me of my freshman spring, where I took a Latin American theater class on Argentina. It was Argentina, Chile, and Peru. And it was basically about the disappearances. And so
Mhm.
it was very skewed on the way that they presented what happened throughout the
Sure.
70s and 80s. And as someone who was born in this country because of what happened in Latin America, my family was on the complete other side. And so I definitely could never bring up my parents or not my parents, but my family's involvement in some of these movements. So it was definitely a lot of self-censoring, and you talk a lot about students self-censoring. What does that look like day to day, and why is it such a problem for learning?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is that we have students who have genuine questions about economic policy who just don't raise their hand because in the classroom, the consensus seems to be settled. It's when a student's writing a paper, they think that a professor wants a particular answer and they regurgitate that answer because they don't want to risk getting an A minus or a B or negative feedback that they might feel uncomfortable with. So it's about students biting their tongue on complex social issues because they're worried that a single misunderstood comment could follow them for the rest of their lives. That a remark in a classroom might be repeated on social media, might be posted online, and a student, I guess, what is it these days? It's called Fizz. It might be on Fizz, and it might haunt them. It's the case that about 54% of students fear that that's going to happen. Like that's a real segment of the population on campus that we have to worry about.
One of the things that has been brought up to me in what I do professionally, I lived in China for 5 years. I've worked with Chinese students, and I've heard stories of Chinese students not wanting to be in small group discussions with other Chinese students for
Hmm.
fear of basically being rattled on. Do
Yeah,
you see this phenomenon happening at institutions such as Dartmouth?
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky. I'm in the government department. I have a reputation. I think students know the kinds of classes that I teach and the way that I approach the world. So I've never experienced that in my classrooms, but it happens. And I've talked to other faculty who have experienced it. Um, Today, it's potentially less of a concern, but 4 years ago, 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, the fear of saying the wrong thing in class or in a small group discussion was so palpable among some students that they just didn't speak. Or when they spoke, they would say, they'd make pleasantries. The number of students that I think are restraining themselves goes undercounted, primarily because we don't ask about it. But secondarily, when we do, there are a lot of students who won't want to admit to it. There are a lot of students who won't want to admit that, in fact, they can't share their opinions in a classroom space. And that's part of the problem. It's not just that we don't know how bad the problem is, but that there is a cultural norm to deny it at all.
Okay. We have a couple of our attendees who have chimed in with some questions. We have a question here that says, when at Dartmouth, one of my best professors, Vincent Starsinger, did a phenomenal job making a strong case for a wide variety of political positions that he didn't hold and didn't agree with. How much progress can be made getting more progressive faculty to teach this way? That seems like a piece of the puzzle because changing faculty composition is hard and takes
Yeah.
so long.
So I'll say two things. So the first thing is that it's culture that pushed us to where we are right now. It's culture that pushed us away from this past at Dartmouth that this person remembers, which means that we can correct with culture, right? We can correct by setting strong norms of disagreement. We can correct with modeling what a classroom should look like. But the second thing that we can do is, I think, reward those professors who are willing to go and step out on a line and advocate against their own personal interests. That's I think what students should do with their enrollment, right? Like they should vote with their feet. We should reward that behavior, and I don't think that it is as rare as perhaps some of the more pessimistic folks might think. It certainly is the case that there are professors who do make a great deal of effort to remain neutral in the classroom. We just need to hold them up as exemplars of what academia should be. We can do that. It would take a cultural shift to do it, but we can do it.
Okay. Another question from the audience. It says, can you give examples of someone on the progressive side of the spectrum who has reported self-censoring? Suffice it to say, I am skeptical. Those who write for the Daily D are ultra progressive and do not bite their tongues, with their ultra progressive ideology being regularly pumped out to the entire student body. I have a hard time believing that any like minded student, progressive student, feels any reservation about speaking his or her mind.
So I've had a lot of students come to my office and in office hours express just that fear. In many instances, it's because they're more centrist, right? So it's not just the case that progressives or extreme progressives are pushing back against conservatives. They're also pushing back against those who don't pass the litmus test of extreme progressive thought. So it's probably not going to be the case that the most vocal progressive is going to feel that they're subject to censorship or feel that they're going to need to self-censor. But it's certainly the case that those who are closer to the center, those who are moderates, the majority of our student body, to be blunt, are going to censor on both sides of the aisle.
Okay. We have another question from an attendee saying, at last week's DFSA webinar, Ed McManus describes a host of excellent policies, programs, and practices that the college has instituted to ensure respectful and constructive engagement with outside speakers who visit campus. These include the Open Expression Facilitator Program, the Dartmouth Dialogue Project, the Brave Spaces Initiative, and the Freedom of Expression and Dissent Policy. Does the college have any analogous programs to promote and strengthen respectful treatment of students' opinions in the classroom?
So that's the whole goal of Dartmouth Dialogues. I think the whole goal is to make it so that expressing your opinion carefully and respectfully is the norm. It is what happens in classrooms. It's what happens in dorm rooms. It's what happens in the dining commons. The whole purpose, as I understand it, as I have seen it implemented, of Dartmouth Dialogues is to try and implement that cultural shift among our students. And it really is the case that if we look at the students who've been admitted over the last year, or the last cycle, there is a strong commitment among them toward dialogue, toward institutional neutrality. We actually asked our um, incoming, is there 29s, I think? We asked our 29s why did they come to Dartmouth? And to what extent did our commitment to dialogue and institutional restraint play in that decision-making process? To what extent did those things play in the decision to come to Dartmouth? About 66% said dialogue was an important part of the decision to come to Dartmouth, and about 50% said institutional restraint. So I think that it's a longer term play. We're not going to see a complete shift overnight, but I think we're building a community, we're building a student body that really are going to be deeply committed to open dialogue and will try to make sure that that happens in the classroom. It's our job as faculty to support them and to ensure that that momentum isn't lost. And I really am optimistic that we'll be able to do that.
It's interesting you mentioned that. When it was time for me to choose which college to attend, I was down to two. One was a liberal arts college that shall be left unnamed, located in Western Massachusetts, and the other one was Dartmouth. And so I visited both within the same week. And when I asked about their Republican club, I got laughed at.
Mhm,
While at Dartmouth's Dimensions, I felt there was much more diversity of thought, much
mhm,
more than I felt at this other institution. And that's why personally I chose it. There was a vocal minority of students, and I was challenged. So I think that there are quite a few people who make that decision based off of dialogue. Um,
mhm.
we have a member of the class of 77 who says, who's asking, how have professors responded to challenges in the classroom? Poor grades? Direct rebuttal? What happened?
Yeah. It really it's hard to say which came first, whether it was the professors policing or the students cowering. I don't know if they perhaps co-occurred. But I think that there is a perception in some departments that if you argue against a professor, you will face scrutiny, you will face pushback, you might be mocked, your written work might be evaluated more harshly. Um, I think that there's a range of responses. They vary by department and they vary by issue. So if you're talking about capitalism and sociology, you're probably going to get much more pushback than if you're talking about communism in government, for example. But if you're a rational actor, if you're a student who wants to maximize grades, maximize future opportunity, we've kind of created a culture where cowardice leads to the outcome that people want. It leads to students tempering their own viewpoints in order to get that A, which might help them get the internship, which might help them get the Lamborghini, right? So I don't know if it's faculty who were the first actors or it was students who caved, but certainly both have occurred over time.
These questions are just pouring in. Interesting observation about Chinese students' self-censorship. Do the data say anything about whether having more or fewer international students has measurable impact on the free speech environment at universities?
So at the moment, I think that our international students are terrified. I've had conversations with several who are worried that if they say the wrong thing or if they're caught in the wrong place, their visas will be revoked, they'll be sent home. Um, they were told that the United States extends free speech protections to everyone, but now are afraid that that's no longer true. So I think that the fear that our international students currently feel is going to amplify self-censorship because that is an entire group of students who are now going to be very tepid and very tenuous in how they engage in any kind of political discussion.
Okay. Professor Westwood, how do you think we ended up with such a polarized situation at Dartmouth, where the discourse is so dominated by liberal dogma?
So the first thing I would say is I don't think that Dartmouth is an outlier. Actually, I think we're pretty good on this count. Uh, there are other campuses that are far worse. I don't think it's a Dartmouth phenomena. I think it is the case that for whatever reason, we don't have a pipeline of conservatives entering the academy. That's one of the things that I think that we really need to address. It's one of the things that I'd like to address by creating a mentoring system for pre-docs and for postdocs. But at the moment, if you're a conservative and you want to get a PhD, or if you're a conservative and you want to be a professor, it's a really challenging thing to commit to. It's a lot of argument, that's a lot of alienation. And as a consequence, we just have conservatives opting out of the academy. And if they're opting out of the academy, we're left in a world where the only people who will opt to become a professor are liberals. So I don't think it's anything Dartmouth did. I think it's just the broader culture of our educational system and how we have really filtered out disagreement.
We have another question that says, I believe that Dartmouth has, in the past decade, used DEI statements to, quote, filter out conservative candidates for faculty positions, which is what you've just mentioned. Shouldn't the college now institute some sort of, quote, affirmative action program to correct this unethical and probably illegal hiring practice?
So this is the argument of Kendi, which is that the only way to fix past discrimination is with current discrimination, and I just fundamentally reject that. I think the way to move forward is to ensure that merit is the criteria and the only criteria when we hire at Dartmouth. I think that to institute conservative DEI would lead to the same backlash that we're currently experiencing now. It may have some effect in the short term, but it's not going to change the cultural equilibrium of the institution. It's just going to make the liberals on campus more resentful, going to make them angrier, and it's going to make them less likely to tolerate, I guess, what you would consider to be the organic absorption of conservative faculty, conservative thought, and conservative students on campus. I really think the path forward has to be the principled path forward.
Okay. What advice would you give to a first year student who is center right or conservative and is passionate about politics, but also wants to not be ostracized on campus? I wish someone gave me this advice when I started at Dartmouth.
Yeah. So look, there's a program at Dartmouth. You may remember this, where you could take a faculty member to lunch.
Yes.
The
And they'll
number
pay
of
for it, and you can get coffee with them.
That's right. Yeah. The number of times I've done that, and about 20 minutes into the conversation, the student will share with me very quietly that they're a conservative. Can't can't count on two hands, right? It's happened quite a lot. If you can't tell a professor your political viewpoints, if you can't tell your peers your political viewpoints, there's just kind of a cat and mouse game. It's figuring out who's like me. I don't know if there's a good answer to that other than to normalize the fact that there are going to be Republicans on campus, and it's okay to be a Republican. It's okay to be conservative. I mean, I've done what I can to try and introduce conservative students to other conservative students whenever possible. But it really is the case that it takes a lot of bravery, and that shouldn't be the case. But I don't know if there's an easy fix around it other than to say risk, take a risk, right? If someone's going to stop talking to you because you're conservative or you have a particular view on a social issue or you identify as a Republican, maybe they're not the people that you should be, most focused on pleasing. Maybe they're not the people that you should hang out with. Take the risk. You're going to learn a lot about the kind of people that you're hanging out with.
And just to add on to that, at least for me, my home was the college Republicans.
Mhm,
That was at that point the only real outlet. Later on came the college libertarians.
mhm,
I would go to their meetings. And then later on came the Dartmouth Political Union.
mhm,
And then right now we have the Dartmouth chapter of Turning Point USA. So there
mhm.
seems to be many more outlets than traditionally there were back in my day, if you will, for center right students.
I
Um,
think the really cool thing about the DPU is that it's a place where you're expected to disagree. So if you're a conservative and you go to college Republicans, or you're a Democrat and you go to college Democrats, you're going to be in an echo chamber, and you certainly are going to have hearty debates. You're going to question, you're going to argue, but you're probably not going to be challenged. I think that the magic of the DPU is that the expectation of attendees is that they will be challenged and that they're actually opting into that. And that's why I have some optimism about our future. That's why I have optimism about the students that we're training, because we do have a very large number of students who are actively seeking this out. The DPU's membership is, for a small institution, very large.
right? We have a question here. What practically will it take to create a Hoover-like institution at Dartmouth? How can alumni find out more about this? How can we help?
Sure. This is the question of the hour. So, the first thing I would say is that there is institutional support. There is a desire to make Dartmouth a leader in free speech. There is a desire to make Dartmouth the leader in viewpoint diversity, to make Dartmouth the model of how dialogue should happen on college campuses. The honest answer is resources. The honest answer is money. There is a lot that can be done for very little, but I think that if we aim big, we'll need to really buckle down and raise as much as we possibly can. So I'm happy to have individual conversations. If you want to reach out, I have some materials. Um, Anything that I can do to help bring our alumni on board, I'm certainly happy to do. It doesn't have to even be money. If it's you want to support this, you want to have a conversation, you want to um, just provide a sounding board on ideas. Happy to do that. Please email me. Please reach out.
Which leads us to a similar question of, is there a way for alumni to designate funds to your project to further development of a more viewpoint diverse faculty?
Yes. I'll tell you where we are right now, which is that we're working on what this will actually look like moving forward. And as an institution, everything moves incredibly slowly. So the answer right now is that there is not a specific place, but in the very near future, there will be.
Okay. And are there any dimensions of viewpoint diversity that we should care about other than left, right?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of dimensions of viewpoint diversity that we should care about because a lot of issues in this country aren't left, right, or even aren't logically left, right, right. So we have on some issues conservatives in endorsing government action and others rejecting it. And then in some cases, we have liberals endorsing government action and other cases rejecting it. So the left-right continuum is just a nice heuristic, and it really highlights the major part of dialogue or discourse that's missing on our campus. But I think that within the conservative movement, within the liberal movement, we're also missing a lot of exchange of ideas. So I certainly see the left-right divide as the largest. But even within the left, we're not having open debate between moderates, the Fettermans versus the Michelle Morans on our campus, and on the other side of the aisle, we're not seeing the debate between the Liz Cheneys and let's say you know the Marjorie Taylor Greens. So certainly left right is important, but even the gradations that exist on the left and the right, I think, are not as represented as we would like.
Okay. Says you advocate that the college hire based on merit going forward as the correction for past hiring biases. How long will it take for such an approach to create a reasonable viewpoint diversity in the faculty?
This is the question, right? So I think that what we have to accept is that this is a long-term project. This is not something that's going to lead to dividends in a year or 2 years or 5 years. This is a 10, a 20-year project. At the moment, there's institutional buy-in, there's a cultural movement behind free speech that we can latch onto. But in order to make this work, in order to right the ship, we're going to have to stand steadfast for a very long time. And that's probably not ideal. That's probably not what anyone wants to hear. But we got into this mess not, in a year or 5 years. We got into this mess over 20 years of concentrated advocacy and concentrated pressure. It's logical that it's going to take about the same amount of time to escape it. But it's also worth noting that a lot of the major transformative projects in this country have occurred over timelines like this. The Federalist Society has changed the federal judiciary, not in 5 years, but over 30 or 40 years. It is unsatisfying to dedicate your efforts and not see an immediate return. But I think as students, as professors, as alumni, our responsibility is to the long-term health of the institution. And that means that sometimes we have to commit to long-term goals.
Okay. So we've talked about professors. If you're a professor, you have tenure, so you don't really have to worry all that much. But what about junior faculty and grad students? They seem especially vulnerable right now. How does the Institute support them without putting their careers at risk?
Yeah. So I might push back a little bit on one of the on your premise, which is that I think faculty who don't care about what other people think or who don't care about getting uh, you know smeared in a lunchroom will say what they want, will do what they want. But a lot of faculty don't have that bravery and will cower even though they have the protections of tenure. But I think that what we're trying to propose here, what we're trying to create here is a place where we can reinforce faculty who are already committed to heterodox viewpoints. So that means building up a support system for them, hiring undergrads who can work as their research assistants, bringing in pre-docs who can not only do work for the faculty, but who can help advance, I guess, the reach of our faculty. We're going to need to protect and prioritize our untenured faculty because obviously we do face the greatest professional risk. Supporting them with tenure is a great thing that we can do. But before we get there, it's going to be resources, it's going to be mentorship, it's going to be engagement, and it's going to have to be part of a larger, I guess, cultural center, larger initiative.
Okay. You've mentioned the Hoover Institute and you've mentioned bringing in fellows. You've also
Mhm.
mentioned the diversity between the left and the right. Sometimes bringing in fellows might mean that they have views that may be very unpopular on campus.
Mhm.
How do you make sure disagreement stays productive and doesn't just become provocation?
Sure. So the first thing that I would say is it's important to have discomfort, right? Discomfort is not something that we should shy away from, but that doesn't mean that we need controversy. So discomfort doesn't mean a lack of respect. It means that your ideas are being challenged. And it doesn't mean endorsing extreme theories, right? This is about bringing Dartmouth caliber scholars, scholars from institutions who we would see to be our peers, to campus and allowing them the opportunity to express their views, to give them a platform to disagree with us, to disagree with mainstream orthodoxy, and to do so in a rigorous way. And some of those views are going to be unpopular on campus. Some of those views are not going to be welcome in certain departments on campus. And that's frankly the point, right? Like that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach students that you don't need a safe space, right? You can feel uncomfortable while still being part of a respectful conversation, while still being part of the kind of classroom environment that higher education should ideally try to maintain. If you're just surrounded by your own views, if you're not challenged in any way, if you think that any inkling of disagreement is offensive, I think we're giving our students a little less credit than they deserve, right? I think that the real point here is we're also not trying to pick fights with departments. This is all about addition. This is not about marginalization. This is not about subtraction. This is not about imposition. We're trying to create a community where intellectual openness is the norm. And the quality of the people that I think we would be able to bring out here and the seriousness of their inquiry would really help to set that tone.
This just reminds me of my freshman year where we got DeRoy Murdoch to come and visit campus. And if anyone is not aware of DeRoy Murdoch, he is a gay black conservative. And he's a columnist. And his event was titled The Right to Discriminate.
Mhm.
Obviously a very provocative title, but that was the point, to have that dialogue,
Yeah.
and to have it come from a nuanced individual who has a lot to say. So that is just kind of reminded me of that. I can't believe it's been almost 20 years. We have a question here that says, do you have you seen any evidence that Dartmouth's current approach to free speech and viewpoint diversity is providing it a competitive advantage in attracting top students and
Yes.
top
Yes.
faculty?
Absolutely. Um, I've had a number of conversations with students who are open that they picked Dartmouth over Stanford, Dartmouth over Harvard, and it was because of Sion. It was because of our response to 10/7. It was because of our commitment to institutional neutrality. It's because of the fact that we are modeling uh, I guess, our culture is what higher education should be. In terms of faculty recruitment, we haven't witnessed much. And that's only because this year, I believe there are 4 lines open. Normally we hire close to 30 to 40 faculty a year. This year we're searching for 4. In the future, I would expect that it would yield dividends, especially in a world as polarized and as pressured by the federal government. But at the moment, we just haven't had an opportunity to observe much on the faculty side.
And speaking of faculty, how many tenured professors are formally or informally allied with you in your goal of achieving a more heterodox society? Heterodox
Uh,
faculty, sorry.
sure. Um, I mean, so I'll say that it's not small. There are a number of faculty in the humanities who are deeply committed and engaged with trying to reform, try to reshape, try to redouble our commitment to free speech. I'm in the government department. There are naturally a lot of allies in the government department, the econ department as well. So, I mean, I don't want to say that it's a majority because I haven't talked to that many faculty, but it is the case that the people who are committed to this are leaders, right? There are um, most productive faculty, they're our most influential faculty, and they're the faculty that I think our students cluster around. So there is momentum, there is inertia. It's just a matter of harnessing that inertia towards an end product.
And on the flip side, do you think students are committed to the cause? Is the college supporting those who are?
um, I think it depends on how you define the college. So if you define the college as upper administration, yes, absolutely. If you define the college as all of the faculty as well as the administration, I'm not so sure. I think that there is a lot of support in specific departments, and that's exactly the problem. We need to ensure that the priorities of upper administration move or carry through the faculty and down to the students.
Okay. So going back to the Hoover Institute, Victor Davis Hanson reports that he is often ostracized by the Stanford faculty, those outside the Hoover Institution. Why do you think that something like the Hoover Institution at Dartmouth would have a significant impact on the culture at the college?
I mean, so having been at the Hoover Institution, having continued to my connection to the Hoover Institution, I can tell you that the reason it works is that Hoover is able to dump resources into those faculty. So it is certainly the case that you're going to potentially pay some social penalty, but the support that you will get for student workers, the support you will get financially, the research support that you'll receive, the network that you'll be a part of, the conversations that you'll be invited to, the speakers who will come and have coffee or have lunch with you. Those tangible things outweigh the social costs. And in talking with Hoover Fellows, I think it is generally the case, it's generally seen to be the case that the value presented by the institution outweighs any pushback that you might receive from other departments. And to be quite frank, I think a lot of that is just jealousy from the extra resources that the Hoover Institution is able to provide to the fellows.
Okay. And if this works the way that you hope, how should the student experience at Dartmouth feel different 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that we would want to assess across a couple of dimensions. The first of which is just self-censorship. Do we see a decrease in a reported need to self-censor? I think, secondly, we would want to look at the extent to which our students feel as if their viewpoints are reflected in the curriculum, right? If you're really interested in the judiciary, are you able in the same term to take a class on constitutional originalism and a class perhaps on the importance of evolution in the judiciary, right? Are you able to actually engage in the classroom with what matters to you? And I suppose lastly, and I think this is discounted by a lot of our faculty, unfortunately, but the perception that the country has of us. Because as much as we might want to admit it, the American taxpayer, they're our constituent, right? We, in large part, exist because of federal funding through student aid, because of grants to the institution. If we can convince the public to continue to invest in Dartmouth, I think that would be a real sign of success.
Um, let's see. What would you say to who's listening right now and thinking, I agree with this, but I'm still nervous to speak up?
So I'd say, of course, I mean, as a young person, it is really hard to risk alienation. It's really hard to say something that might make someone not like you. But at the same time, a part of growing up and maturing is knowing that we have to do things that are costly. That's not easy advice to give, but I think it's the case that sometimes we just have to be willing to accept that there are consequences, there are externalities, there are effects. Sometimes those are good, sometimes those are bad, but bravery wins, truth wins. If I were a specific student who was actually seeking out guidance, I would say, come to my office. Let me talk to you. Let me see if I can arrange a lunch or a dinner with other students on campus that you might not know and who you might be able to have the kind of conversation that you want to have.
And final question, why? Why is now the time?
Yeah. So, a few reasons, right? I think first, the data that we've talked about is not static, it's getting worse. And if we don't intervene, I really worry that we'll get to a point where we can't recover. If the ideological narrowing of the professorate continues to accelerate in the way that it has, the longer we wait, the harder the fix is going to be. I think secondly, this is our competitive advantage, right? We were the first. We made dialogue and intellectual diversity part of our institutional identity before anyone else saw that it was fashionable. And quite frankly, when it was incredibly risky and unpopular. But other schools are overtaking us, right? With really serious money. Northwestern has put in $20 million, Notre Dame, depending upon how you look at it, 55 to $155 million. $75 million at Michigan. A lot of other schools are trying to reap the rewards of what we pioneered. So if we don't invest in permanent infrastructure, we really risk going from being the leader to just being a school that talked about it but never built anything. And then I think thirdly, and I'll be really blunt about this, the current political moment is going to vanish, right? Public trust in higher education has collapsed, and the federal government is trying to respond. But we're going to have, as it's the case with all politics, we're going to have a new Congress, we're going to have a new administration. So if we can act now, while there is an opportunity, while there is pressure, while there is interest, we can be much more successful than if we wait or if we dawdle. But I think finally, the point that I'd like to make is that we have the people, right? We have a student body that is increasingly committed to free speech. We have a lot of faculty who may be afraid to express their political views publicly, but who in fact do represent a true plurality of ideas. We have students who are hungry for the kind of disagreement that we can facilitate. And as you all show, we have an alumni network that cares really deeply about Dartmouth and cares really deeply about free speech and our mission. So yeah, it's the case that there's a confluence of social trends, a confluence of events that have made it now the moment, I think, and have made it now so that it's probably going to be easier to do this um, than it has ever been, or that it might be in the near future.
Right. Well, Professor Westwood, thank you very much for speaking with us this evening. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. We had a lot of questions from the attendees. You can find this video from tonight's discussion on www.dartmouthfreespeech.com. Please sign up for our emails so that you can get information about future events. And with that, I hope that you guys have a good rest of your evening or afternoon if you're on the West Coast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving us this hour of your time.